tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Now, loving kindness is the current standard modern translation of the word metta, Pali word for friendship, friendliness. I like the translation benevolence, kindness. And, it's one of the qualities that is, consistently praised in the Buddhist texts. It's the first and kind of cornerstone quality of a set of 4 heart qualities called the brahmavihāras, the divine abidings, where Brahma, translated as divine, vihara is a resting stop along the way. If you're a pilgrim, you stay in a vihara. So it's a resting place. It's also a home. It's a dwelling. So the dwellings, the divine or holy, to use a word we don't use very much here, but the holy dwelling places for the heart. The metta is the first of these, friendliness or benevolence. The second is compassion, karuna. That's the same quality, really, of friendliness or kindness, but in the presence of suffering. So when the heart encounters suffering, it's not that it's no longer metta. It's just that the metta becomes flavored by the quality of wishing that suffering were eased. So, in a world where there's so much challenge and so much, we can say, evil, maybe for some of us, metta turns to compassion right away. Like that's really the flavor that comes forward, and that's appropriate. The third of the qualities is sometimes translated as sympathetic joy or empathic joy. Sometimes I like the translation appreciation or even celebration, because this is the feeling of joy at someone else's well-being. And yes, you can have this. The Pali word is mudita. You can have mudita for yourself. You can be proud of your own goodness, for instance, happy about your own goodness. But this is one where it really shines when it's for others, when we're really appreciating someone else's well-being, good fortune. And the fourth of the brahmavihāras, the divine abidings, is translated as equanimity or equipoise. And the Pali word is upekkha. And this is the quality of the heart that is balanced, really resting with wisdom in the presence of both suffering and joy, suffering and well-being. And equanimity has as its primary emotional quality peacefulness, which is subtle and maybe not that familiar to many of us, but it comes in moments and is profoundly nourishing. But the foundation for all of these is metta, and it's really, as a training, the training is to figure out how to be kind in the heart. So it doesn't have to be an effusive, big feeling. Metta is, friendliness really is the literal translation. There's a different word that means love, like the I love you kind of love, which is a related quality, but it has a different kind of, flavor to it. It's often more personal. It has a kind of there's more movement in a certain way in it. There's sometimes more desire or wanting in it. Metta, friendliness. If we think of how we often just use the word friends, this is my friend, and you might think about how you love your friends, and and as always, start with the easy ones, right? The ones that are like, oh yeah, my friend, I love this person, my friend, and it's the friends who you're not like in some drama with them. You don't have a crush on them. You're not trying to get something out of them. They're not trying to get something out of you. You're not trying to get somewhere with them. You just care for each other, and maybe it's been like that for a long time, and there's some ease, and that quality of friendliness can be, in a way, what metta feels like. Like you just want them to be well. They're a good person. You want their well-being, and they want yours. And in a way, at its best, metta is really clean. It has a kind of sweet easiness to it. This person is easy to love, easy to care for. So why is it that our friends are, easy to care for in this way? Like, what's up with that? One of the challenges in metta, I think sometimes, is that we make it too complicated. That we feel like we have to approve of someone to wish them well, or that we have to know them deeply to wish them well, or really like them in a certain way. And that's not exactly what the quality is, actually. It's really this a basic warmth of heart. Sometimes the texts say that when the negative qualities of ill will or hatred, judgment, criticism, complaint, when the painful qualities of the heart are absent, that metta is the natural resting place of the heart. So, it's almost like if you're not hating on someone, this kind of simple friendliness is a basic response. And imagine that you are in a new place. You don't know anybody. You're not with friends. You're alone there. But in one of those moments in your life where being alone is not distressing, you don't want something else. You're just somewhere. Like you're in a new city. Maybe it's a nice place, or you're walking in the woods, having a walk alone. You feel safe and at ease. And think about a place where you feel safe and at ease. And maybe that is with someone, but you're just in a space of being generally well and not reaching out for others in a particular way. And then think about what it's like from that space to see others, again, in a way that is simple, non-dramatic, not threatening. You see someone across the trail or across the street, or just people in the park doing their thing. And when you are in a state where there's wellness, what's the natural feeling toward others, right? Sometimes it's really simple, kind of neutral even. You're not going to get in their business. You don't want to get in their business. And actually there's just people, and here comes some dogs, like, oh, dogs, and here comes some squirrels and some birds, and all the creatures are here. And you're just like, you don't love them with a passionate love, but you're not scared of them or hating them. You're just like, yeah, there can be a very simple warmth of heart. And that really this kind of warmth of heart is our birthright. It's just a good way to be. It's a very natural way to be when we are not startled, when we're not frightened and set off of our center by others. So as some of you will know, the story of the origin of loving kindness practice is that a bunch of monks went off to practice deep in a forest grove that was known for being haunted. And so this is a ghost story. And they went into this grove and they sat down and started to practice. And the grove was, you might say, haunted, but that's just another word for, beings lived there. And besides animals, those beings were beings of the spirit realms. They were, it seems like in the story that they were nature spirits. They were like the spirits of the trees and of that valley. And, I don't know what had happened to them in the past, but spirits can be wounded, traumatized, neurotic, just as much as we can. They are unenlightened just as we are. So they're just a different kind of being. And they were afraid. They didn't like the monks coming. They didn't like people coming to do stuff in their grove. And I don't know which particular grove it was, but I know that some of our most ancient human stories are about deforestation. So I can imagine that the tree spirits might have had some cause to not be entirely happy that humans were coming around. Maybe they got word from the cedars of Lebanon that humans were no good, and I don't know. I could turn it into a ecological parable. But the original story just says that, there were these spirits there and they didn't want the monks there. And so the spirits, in the nighttime when the monks started to meditate, the spirits would make a clatter and would scare the monks, would kind of rustle around and do things. The monks went back to the Buddha and they said, we can't practice there, we're scared. These spirits are frightening us. And the Buddha said, okay, you're going to do this practice. He taught them the practice. He said, go back to the grove and practice. So the monks went back and, the forest spirits are like, oh, it's you guys. You came back. But the monks sat down and they started doing this practice. And the forest spirits were like, oh, well, this is different. This feels different. They're sensitive to feeling. They're sensitive to tone. And the monks were doing loving kindness practice. So in the early texts, in the Pali Canon, loving kindness practice is described in a very simple way that we mostly, actually, I teach it this way. We did it a little differently tonight with the phrases, but mostly I teach this way that is a version of how it's described in the early texts, which is nowadays often called radiating Mettā or radiating the brahmavihāras. It says that one cultivates a heart of goodwill, benevolence, kindness, Mettā, and you cultivate it in one quarter, and then another, and then another, and another. And what that generally means is directionally. So you think about, like, let's say I'm facing north, doing my meditation, I'm facing north. I would orient to the north, and I would cultivate the heart of loving kindness shining out to fill the whole quarter of the north. So, and you can do this as a visualization. You can think of where you are. Here I am in Sonoma County. I could think of all the beings to the north. And if it helps to jog my spatial attention, I could think of my friends up in Mendocino and, and Humboldt and Oregon and Washington and Canada. Or I could think of the different kinds of, like, the big redwoods of the Northern California coast, and then the Olympia Mountains. And I could think of the bears and the grizzlies up in Alaska, and I could think of the hawks that I know in Northern California. All the things, right? You bring to mind the north, and then you shine the quality in that direction, and then you bring to mind the other quarter. So then you would go around one traditional way to do this would be to go around the quarters clockwise. So you might start with the north and then go to the east and the south and the west. So I might think of everything to the east, and you can be local, meaning earthbound. I could think about, like, oh, all the beings over there in the Central Valley, and then in the Sierras, and then over in Nevada. Hello, Nevada, radiating Mettā to the east. There you are. And further, and they radiate to one's friends in the Midwest, the East Coast, and Europe, wherever. But of course, east goes a lot further than this planet. You can go all the way out. You can James Webb Space Telescope your way to radiating Mettā all the way across the galaxy to the east. All the beings with strangely shaped heads in the east. May they be well. And to the south, all the beings to the west. And you can include the above and below. Traditionally, in the Buddhist system, you can think about, they'll often talk about the 6 directions, and that means front, back, side, above, and below. So you get a sense of the sphere around yourself. So you can radiate Mettā to the beings below, all the bugs and earthworms and lava spirits, and and then through the earth to everyone on the other side of the earth, all of them down there in the hemispheres, and and out far beyond the galaxy. far, far away. So that's the first practice. The Buddha taught the monks this practice, radiating metta. They're shining loving kindness. They're being, essentially, I think what this means, this practice of radiating, you can get into the directions if you want, but how it feels often when I really touch into it, and what I imagine that the earliest practice was suggesting, was just to invoke the feeling of benevolence or non-contentiousness, and then let that become boundless. This is really a direction that's often given, because you can enter absorption with these qualities, meaning you can let the quality become so much the focus of your attention that everything else drops into the background, and you become immersed just in this one quality. And so you just let the quality of this kindness, this benevolence, fill your being. And as you do, it really becomes, and especially if you really feel into the direction thing, it can become a very somatic kind of sense of the body often really relaxes, and it helps if the body can relax and be not in pain for metta practice. I'll say a little bit about that in a minute. But there's a sense of just filling the whole field with this friendliness. And, as I do that, it can be felt, of course, you can feel when someone, if you go into a place, where there's people, and you can tell the person who's, radiating unpleasantness and stress, you can feel it. You walk past them and it's like a little field of stressfulness, and you can tell when you walk past someone and they're just at ease, and they're kind of radiating their at easeness, and if people have done this a lot, you can really feel it. So my teacher Jack Kornfield talks about meeting a Tibetan teacher, the 16th Karmapa, who's the head of one of the schools of Tibetan Buddhism, on one of his first visits to the United States. And Jack had been in Asia a lot, in South Asia, India, and Thailand, and Burma, and Sri Lanka, and Nepal. And, he said, he had met a lot of monks, and he respected the Karmapa, but it wasn't his particular teacher, and but he was kind of along for the meeting, as happened in the 70s. It was a small world, not a lot of Buddhists around. You got invited to meet the Karmapa, not like it is now. But he said they went to meet the Karmapa in like the Boston airport or something, and he got off the plane, and now I'm having doubt. I'm not sure if it was Jack. It was one of the Spirit Rock teachers. This is a story that was told on retreat a long time ago. But he said he was, standing a bit back from the crowd, and he was a little like, okay, here's another fat monk in red robes. It's like, this is very nice. I'm sure he's a nice guy. He's smiling, but then at some point he found himself closer in, and he was, coming in to greet this person. And he said when he came in, to kind of about 5 feet away, he could just feel almost like a shift in the air around him. It was like a force field, and he instantly just felt like better. He's like, he said, like, all my stress just dropped away, and I felt like at ease. And I was like, oh, I love being here. This is great. And he just looked over him. He's like, I love this guy, this old monk. He's wonderful. And then he was like, what just happened? And he backed away again, went back to 15 feet away. And he said it was like the whole airport just got colder and kind of less loving, and then he came in again, and he was like, it's like, oh, it's this guy. He was just radiating kindness, and you just wanted to be near him. And who knows, stories like that, but also maybe in a less dramatic or less Orientalist kind of way, we all know people like this, where you get near them, and it's just like, oh, I kind of just want to stay near this person. And and sometimes we misinterpret moments like that, and we fall in love with them or something like that. We get confused. But metta is, part of what's compelling about it, I think, is that it's a kind of friendliness that doesn't want anything of you. It doesn't want you to be a certain way or wants to get something from you. It's, love without conditions. And that's pretty compelling. That you want to be around that. So the monks went into this forest grove. They were radiating Mettā, and the forest spirits liked them so much. They just like, well, we like these guys. This is great. They wanted them around, and the spirits switched into being their protectors. So, they would make sure that no one came along to disturb the monks' meditations. They made sure that they, had enough to eat and things like that. They helped kind of support it to be a really conducive place for practice. So there's this one form of practicing loving kindness where you radiate the quality all around. And this is really sweet, and it's a good form of practice for folks who don't really resonate with the phrases and the systematic nature of the phrase practice. The phrase practice came into being some centuries after the Buddha. It's the primary style mentioned in the big commentaries in the Pali Canon, especially the commentary called the Visuddhimagga, the Path of Purification. And the way that we usually teach it has this series of categories where you would traditionally start with yourself, and then a benefactor, which is usually like your teacher or your supporter, and then a good friend, and then a neutral person, and then a difficult person, and then all beings, and sort of different categories of all beings. And part of the logic here is that you are going for the feeling, and sometimes it's hard to find the feeling of loving kindness, as many of us said in our check-in. And so you start by, in a sense, seeding the contemplation by thinking about folks who you love in a personal way. This is almost, it's an interesting, like, it's a little, it's almost like a slightly tantric style practice where you use personal love, the individual fondness, as a way to get in touch with a feeling, and then you swap out the personal for the universal, and you try to keep the feeling going. So it's like, I think about my good friend who I really love and I care for, and I get the feeling going. I really think about them. And you'd be like, I just love this person. They're awesome. And I care for them and I want them to be well. May you be well. May you be well. And I start to feel just like it feels so good to wish them well. And then you do a little tiny insight maneuver, and you say, well, they are just a regular person. I happen to love them, but the person who served me my pasta this evening in the Italian restaurant with my kid, they also want to be happy and they want to have a good life. I don't know them at all, but may you be happy, may you be well. Of course I wish you well. And so then you switch out the neutral person, and you already feel loving because you've been loving on your friend, and suddenly you're like, well, you just sort of, you look around behind your friend, there's another person walking up the street, and you're like, them too. May they be happy. And so the neutral person practice really is in a way, one of the most important turns in the practice, in the formal progression, where you turn the personal into the impersonal. So you practice with that for a while. And then, of course, the one that gets us all is that, the people that you really disapprove of in this world, who are mean or terrible or unskillful or straight up evil, doing awful stuff in the world. And boy, there are so many of them. Confused people doing bad stuff. And this, it really partly Mettā practice turns toward compassion in these moments, and that's appropriate. Sometimes it turns really just toward insight, where you have to really consider that everyone suffers, that everyone wants comfort or ease or peace of mind. And the way that some people try to find peace is really wrong-headed, like hurts other people very much. I'll only have peace if I take this thing from someone else. I'll only have peace if I have power in this way. I'll only have peace if things are the way I want them to be. And I don't, I've lost touch with caring whether other people are hurt by my choices. Like some folks are so wounded that that's the state of the heart. But they still want to be happy. And they might not even know it or express it in any way that we recognize, but they do, because it's built into our biology to want to be safe and at ease. And so sometimes you really have to rely on knowing that to be able to send metta to difficult people. But one thing that to really think about is that metta is not, it's not a psychic outreach to them. You're not crossing a boundary to send kindness to someone who's difficult. You're not making psychic contact with them. You're not reaching out for connection with them at all. There's really, it's wonderful actually to be able to wish well to someone who's difficult for us, and know that doing so doesn't have to change anything about our relationship. Doesn't have to. I don't even have to like them anymore. Every once in a while I've sent metta to a difficult person for a while and found that I don't dislike them as much as I used to. And once that happened, and I was even a little bit disappointed. I was like, I really don't like them, but actually I don't mind them so much now. And I was like, oh well, there you go. I did my first long metta retreat. I did 6 weeks of doing this phrases without stopping, dawn till waking to sleeping, just keep the phrases going. And when you do long retreat like that, you do the first 2 weeks just on yourself, and that's just a miniature, because most of us should probably do it for a year. At one point I was complaining to Jack about how many things I was disappointed in, most of which were myself. And he said, sometimes with people like you, I tell them to just do metta for themselves for a year. And I was so aversive to metta practice that I was like, and inside I was like, dude, I'm totally not doing that, and but I did it for a couple weeks on retreat, and it's challenging. Sometimes I am my own difficult person, but there you go, and you just keep doing it. It's interesting that invoking the feeling is supposedly the heart of practice. That is partly what it's doing, but it's also a couple other things. One of the things it also is a concentration practice. So it is a singular thing that you keep your attention on and you stay with it. And because it is that, it's getting the feeling is not always the most important thing. And you can't control feelings. And so what you do actually is, one of the things that's helpful about the phrases practice is that you can say them no matter how you're feeling. So you can be totally pissed off and still be like, may I be happy? May I be at peace? Even though I'm like, I'm so grumpy. And it's like, yes, may I be strong in body and mind. And, sometimes saying the phrases themselves triggers a wave of opposite feeling. Because, if I'm really unhappy, what is going to remind me of that more than wishing myself happy? And may I be happy? It's like, yeah, buddy. Yeah, may you be. But you're not, are you? No, you're not. Sorry, I was at an Italian restaurant with my kid tonight. So, and so, you can think of it as a purification practice, because lots of stuff may come up as you do it. You can think of it as a concentration practice. Things come up as you do it. And, one of the things about the phrase sequence, the sequence of categories, self, benefactor, dear friend, neutral person, difficult person, and then all beings. And then the 4 phrases, and the traditional phrases, again, are safety, happiness, strength, and ease. So the ones I use are, if it was for myself, I would say, may I be safe from harm of all kinds, inner and outer. I kind of have a long version and a short version. I'll say, may I be safe from harm of all kinds, inner and outer. That's the full version. And then once it gets rolling, I just say, may I be safe. And when it gets even more rolling, I just say, safe, and let that be kind of the key word, and the rest, what you're saying. The rest fills out. So safety, inner and outer. The second one is, may I be happy. Often I'll say, may I be happy and peaceful, because I like being peaceful. I add that in. The third one is, may I be strong in body and mind. And of course that includes heart. That's sort of like inner and outer strength, different kinds of being strong, being resilient is in there. And the fourth one, which I really love, and I can only hear my teacher Sylvia's voice say it, may I live with ease. And sometimes she'll say, may I live with the ease of well-being, or the great ease of well-being. So you would repeat, each of the four phrases as many times as needed in each of the categories going down, and, expanding out to all beings. In the commentaries, they spin this out much more elaborately, and there's a formal sequence that you can go through. That again, I've done it just once on this long retreat that I did. This was about 20 years ago. I did 6 weeks of Mettā, and I did the full sequence kind of at the end of the retreat for a bunch of days. I was taught to do it outside, standing up, and I would stand facing the north, and you do it once you've gone through the basic categories and you're into all beings, and you would do a whole set of all beings that includes things like beings that fly, beings that crawl, beings that walk, beings that are visible, invisible. There's a whole set of ways of talking about humans, animals, spirit beings, all of that. And you would do it for each of the directions, and I was told to do it to include the half directions. So I would do every category. So myself, eat 4 phrases for each: myself, the benefactors, the good friends, the neutrals, the difficults, the all beings, beings that fly, beings that walk, beings that crawl, beings that swim, young beings, old beings, near beings, far beings, physical beings, spirit beings. However long that takes for it. And then I would turn from the north to the northeast and do the entire sequence in the northeast, and then the entire sequence to the east, and then up and down. So you have 10 directions total for the entire sequence, and you have to actually keep track of where you are in the whole sequence. So it's completely, it's hyper systematic, right? It's annoyingly systematic, but what it is actually a concentration practice. And you might even think about, like, in the ancient world, where it's an oral culture and everything is memorized, it's a rote memorization, somatic, spatial ritual dance, right? You're out there, you're on a hilltop, and you're turning slowly in a circle, wishing and thinking about beings of all these different kinds every single time, and just shining it out, all these different kinds of beings, all these different kinds of beings. And there's a particular kind of trance in that sort of practice, and so that's a really ancient form, and whether you're doing the really simple form of just like sitting, shining the quality, going for the feeling, or something really systematic like that, Mettā is a form of practice that, I think it has this, one of the things that's most satisfying and helpful about it is that it has this kind of healing or psychologically well quality to it. Like, besides the concentration, besides focusing, besides purification even, that it's just healthy to rest in states of non-contention. And so then this is really just the cultivation of non-content. How to be non-contentious with the world, A couple other basics of practice, and then we'll open to some discussion. On the question earlier, or the reflection on physical pain. it's true that it is, it's more challenging to feel at ease, relaxed, loving, kind, non-contentious when there's, strong physical discomfort. The instruction is not to, when you're doing mindfulness, you can sit with a lot of discomfort because with vipassana practice, mindfulness practice, you're noting it and you're saying, this is aching, this is burning, this is unpleasant, I don't like it. But you're just aware of all those things that are present. And it's really good practice to not just run away from discomfort, but being mindful of it. When you're doing loving kindness practice in a formal way, it's fine to do it with discomfort, and you can spend more time sending compassion to yourself for discomfort or toward others, because everyone's body hurts at different times. And often it turns into compassion practice. But particularly on retreat, we were instructed not to really push through physical pain if you're doing loving kindness practice. If I sat down to meditate and there was really an ache in the body and I wanted to do metta, I might decide to do it like while walking instead of sitting, or do it in some kind of motion. Lay in the bath and do it, it's just easier to love on others and yourself when there's, as much ease as possible. So, not needing to push through in that way. And, the piece about purification, it's interesting, get the body as comfortable as you can. But of course, when you're doing metta, sometimes the heart really complains. And it's like, I don't want to do that, or I don't feel loving. I feel quite hateful, in fact, or whatever. And that kind of discomfort, like in the same way that if you're doing mindfulness practice, it's helpful sometimes to really stay with discomfort in order to learn from it. When you're doing metta practice, it's helpful to stay with the uncomfortable emotions to learn from them. And so, aversion, hatred, complaint, judgment comes up, all the thing, boredom. You can think of it like you're with that good friend that we talked about, and you just love them, and you get together with them and you're like, oh, hi sweetie, how are you doing? I haven't seen you, it's so good to see you. And they're like, actually, I'm not doing so well. And you're like, oh, really? What's going on? They're like, oh, this, and you just listen. And you're like, yeah, that's all right. Or you get together with your good friend and you totally love them, but today they happen to be really annoying. And you're like, oh my God, you're so annoying. They're talking about that same thing. And you're like, would you stop talking about that thing? But they're your friend. And you're like, okay, I love you. You're kind of annoying. You're ruining the entire lunch talking about your job, and it's okay, whatever. And you still love them, right? You're just like, you kind of just roll your eyes at them a little bit and you're like, yeah. All right. It's fine. So you can do that with yourself. You say, oh, I came here to invoke universal loving kindness and I'm a total grump. And you could be like, I love you, you grump. It's all right. And so there's some equanimity there, and there's some just the wisdom of long friendship. So you be a long-term friend to yourself and others, and and the heart just slowly over time, sometimes it comes and goes, but it warms up. And then more and more you get to move through the world with this benevolence as your home base, even in a world with really quite a bit of terrible stuff and people in it. And really compassion comes forward. So, all right, pausing there. Thank you, listening.